Last week, Father Jude talked about the horrors of crucifixion. And today we celebrate this feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. The striking red vestments remind us not only of the cruelty of this form of punishment, but also, as St. Paul reminds us in the second reading, the glory that Jesus has shown to all the world and the forgiveness of sins that is brought to us. But the horrors of the cross were not lost on the first Christians. For almost 400 years, the cross was not a symbol for Christians. You wouldn't find it in their churches. It wasn't carried in procession at all. It's thanks to other events that eventually the cross became almost the central symbol in all of our churches. First of all, we can thank St. Paul. Although today's second reading doesn't talk about the cross, it was St. Paul that talked an awful lot about the glory of the cross and how we are to proclaim the cross of Christ who is crucified, who has brought us forgiveness of sins. But it was only in the 4th century that there was a young man by the name of Constantine. His father had been a general in the Roman army, and Constantine was also a soldier rising up in the ranks. And he wanted to become the emperor, and he wanted to unite a divided Roman Empire under himself. And one day he had a vision. Up in the sky he saw a cross, and the words, "In this sign, conquer." And so the young Constantine put this cross on the shields of all of his soldiers, and eventually he won almost every battle, and he did become the Roman emperor. And so the first thing that he did was, of course, acknowledge Christians and stopped all the persecution against them. A couple of years later, he made Christianity the favored religion of the Roman Empire. But you can imagine seeing this cross is something that became kind of the symbol of his reign. And then he stopped all executions by crucifixion. It was after a number of years that the cross became not the sign, rather, of cruelty, but rather the sign of a victory, and became the central figure for all Christians. At first, it was a bare cross. The image of Jesus was not on it. But rich people would donate gems and silver and gold, and they would decorate that cross because it reminded them of the glory of the resurrection. That is why, when they started to celebrate Lent, that they used to cover the cross with a purple veil. Why? To hide the glory of the cross, to remind them of the sufferings of Jesus. But for many Christians, even at the time of Constantine, the image of Jesus that they had was one who suffered. In fact, many of them became Christians, probably recognizing that they might be persecuted and that they might be killed in the name of Jesus Christ. And so the suffering Christ was the prime image. They really didn't need a crucified Christ on the cross to remind them of this. It is only later, in the Middle Ages, when the church focused more on the sufferings of Christ, that the image of Christ was then placed on the crucifix as a reminder not only of the resurrection, but also of the death of Jesus Christ. This cross is something that has been put on our foreheads when we were baptized and the forehead when we were confirmed. The gospel reminds us how we are to live this cross. It tells us that God is love, and God so loved the world. Today, then, we have to reflect in our own hearts and lives on how we are called to live the cross and to live this message of love. Last Sunday, Pope Leo canonized 2 young saints, Carlos Acutis and also Pier Giorgio Frassati, 2 young men who lived exemplary lives. I think they form a good model, especially for all our young people, especially today when we're thinking about our youth movements. Carlo was born in London, England, but his parents moved to Italy very shortly after his birth. They weren't practicing Catholics, but somehow the grace of God was with this young man, and he desired ardently to make his first communion. But to do so, he had to convince his parents to start going to church. They readily did, and he was able to receive his first communion. On his way to school, so often, if there was an early Mass, he would go there. If not, he would simply go into the church in order to pray. Like many young people, he received an allowance, but he didn't spend that on himself. He used to save his money, because he also used to pass by a park where there were many vagrants and many beggars, and he would stop and give money to some of these people as well. But perhaps Carlo is best noted for his computer work. He started a website in which he chronicled for people all the Eucharistic miracles that had happened over the centuries. He became an example of someone who spread love. In an unfortunate situation, he came down with leukemia. He died at the age of 15. And so his parents brought him to the church for his funeral. The parents were utterly surprised at the hundreds of people that showed up for the funeral of this young man. The people that he had helped in the park, the people that he had helped, the children that he had helped in school, because he used to go to anyone who was bullied in order to console them and to give them reassurance. Pier Giorgio Frassati, another young man. Again, his parents were basically atheists, but again, the grace and the power of God was with him. He was a very religious young man, and he devoted himself to service as well. He joined, when he was a teenager, the St. Vincent de Paul Society. And after school, and whenever he had spare time, he would go and visit poor families. Like Carlo, he used to save his money. Now, his parents were very, very rich, and so he had a little more money. And he used to use that money again to help those who were poor. Of those women who had children who couldn't afford enough to raise their children as well. Giorgio loved hiking, and he loved mountain climbing. And he used that as a way of evangelizing. He would invite his friends to go with him, and they'd go off for day excursions. And he would use that opportunity to talk to them about the love of God. And many of them converted, and many of them started coming with him to church as well. He died at the age of 24. He had contacted polio. And so these two young men stand for us as an example. It's a reminder we don't have to be an adult in order to be a servant of God. It is a call to all of us. Now, if these two young men were able to practice ardently their faith without much support from their parents, imagine how much better we can be when we support our children. I think that's one of the reasons why youth groups are so important. It brings young people together in order that they have companionship, in order that they see other young people who are also interested in serving God as well. And so we ask your prayers, but let us try to figure out how in the simple ways of our own life we can practice the cross by our acts of love.